Dr. Theo Galloway stepped to the podium with a sigh. This wasn't his first lecture, but it felt like it should be. He looked out at the sea of uncomfortable faces in the audience and tried not to grimace. It was always the same. Ethicists and scientists had two modes when it came to the subject of human-alien hybridization. Either they pretended to understand what he was saying, or they spent the entire lecture mentally calculating how quickly they could get out of the room. Theo tapped the microphone. It made an absurd boop, just to let everyone know that he wasn't quite sure how to work it either. He cleared his throat. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. Today, we're going to discuss a real hot-button issue, the ethics of interspecies reproduction. Or as I like to call it, who gets to sleep with whom, and why it might be a really bad idea. A few chuckles escaped the audience. Theo smiled to himself, feeling a little better. Humor always helped, but seriously, he continued, pacing a bit. When we talk about ethics, what we're really talking about is power. Who has it? Who gets to decide what's right or wrong? And, perhaps most importantly, who gets to breed with aliens? This last sentence was met with silence. The room held its collective breath, the word aliens hanging there, suspended in the air like some cosmic joke. You heard me, Theo added, now walking with confidence. Aliens. You know, the little green men, the ones we've been obsessing over for, decades now. It's no longer science fiction, folks. It's a science fact. He spread his arms out, looking around the room, as though expecting an alien to pop out of the rafters and wave hello. Another awkward silence. One man, wearing a NASA sweatshirt, raised his hand. Are we actually talking about human and alien reproduction? He asked, voice faltering. Theo nodded. Yes. We are. I know. It sounds insane. But stay with me. He grinned. It's happening, and apparently, nobody's quite sure what to make of it. The man lowered his hand, muttering something about needing more coffee. Theo continued, now more animated. Look, we've already had a few breakthroughs, all right? A few years ago, a top-secret experiment out of the Galactic Bio-Reproduction Institute, which, by the way, is a thing, successfully crossbred human and alien DNA to create what they're calling a hybrid. Theo made air quotes around hybrid, as if it were some sort of unholy experiment cooked up by mad scientists. Now, ethically speaking, there's some debate about whether it's morally sound to have our DNA mingling with that of, say, an extraterrestrial. The purists, you know the types, say it's unnatural. The pragmatists, like me, well, we're all for innovation as long as it doesn't involve turning our children into hybrid lobster people with 8 tentacles. The audience laughed again, though a few of them were looking at him like he'd just asked if anyone was interested in cloning their pets. Theo took a deep breath, ready to get to the serious stuff. But here's the kicker, he said, his tone shifting from light to more contemplative. Somewhere between ethical research and military exploitation, this all got very murky. The hybrids, they're more than just lab rats now. They're individuals, with rights, with intelligence, with, well, if not emotions yet, at least some pretty advanced cognitive processing. And the real question we need to ask ourselves is this: what happens when they start asking questions? The audience grew quieter, so, Theo went on, in the coming weeks, I'll be investigating a new government-funded hybridization program. The reports are coming in, and let me tell you, things are getting really interesting. And by interesting, I mean terrifying. For both the hybrids and, well, us. Theo finished his sentence just as someone from the back of the room raised their hand again. Theo groaned inwardly. He already knew this was coming. Yes, he asked. The woman at the back, middle-aged, wearing thick glasses and a printed skirt that probably hadn't been fashionable in a decade, spoke up. So, ethically, where do you stand on this? Is it okay for us to, I don't know, play God and create these hybrids? She put air quotes around create, as if just saying the word made her skin crawl. Theo hesitated. He had practiced his speech all night. He had been ready for the questions, even the hard ones. But this was a different kind of question. One that struck too close to home. Well, Theo began slowly, that's the thing. I mean, ethically, there are no clear boundaries here. Some of the top scientists think they're doing us all a favor by creating a super race of humans and aliens. Others think we're just one step away from creating a new species of genetic slavery. A loud murmur ran through the room, and Theo knew he had their attention now. But before anyone could ask more, a voice broke in from the back of the room. It's true, said a woman's voice, steady and calm. It's not just science anymore. It's politics. The hybrids are the next frontier, whether you like it or not. Theo froze. He didn't recognize the voice. And when he looked up, the woman who had spoken was standing in the back of the room, her hands folded casually in front of her. She wasn't one of the audience. She was someone else entirely. A figure from the government. Her name was Dr. Vera Novick, and the room felt smaller when she said it. Theo's eyes narrowed as Dr. Vera Novick made her entrance. She was tall, poised, and carried herself like someone who had spent years at the very top of the scientific hierarchy. The kind of person who knew the right doors to open and the right palms to grease. But Theo wasn't fooled. He could sense a sharp edge beneath her calm exterior. She had made a grand entrance, perhaps too grand. It didn't take much for Theo to guess that Vera Novick wasn't just another academic. She was someone with a purpose. She walked with an air of authority, her black leather shoes tapping lightly on the polished floor as she crossed the room toward him, cutting through the murmur of confused onlookers like a shark moving through a school of fish. "Dr. Galloway," she said, her voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I'm glad you could make it." Theo forced a smile, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. It wasn't that he disliked Vera. In fact, he admired her intellect. But her methods, well, those were another matter entirely. He'd read enough about her background, about her rise through the ranks of the Galactic Ethics Council and her involvement in the hybridization experiments, to know that her presence at this conference wasn't just about ethical discussions. It was about control. "I didn't expect to see you here, Dr. Novick," Theo replied, keeping his tone casual, though his mind was already spinning. "I was just explaining some of the finer points of hybridization to the crowd. You know, just the basics, ethics, consent, DNA manipulation, the usual." Novick's smile was razor sharp. "I'm sure they appreciated your perspective on the subject," she said. Her eyes flicked toward the crowd. "But I think it's time we stopped dancing around the issue and addressed something a little more urgent. You've heard about the new research, haven't you?" Theo was careful not to let his surprise show. He knew about the research, everyone did. But Vera's sudden appearance, her eagerness to steer the conversation toward the hybrids, felt like an invitation to step into a much darker territory. "I've heard rumors," Theo said, keeping his voice level. "But I'm sure the details are classified." Dr. Novick's smile grew wider. "Oh, the details are classified, but not for long. You're a man of integrity, Dr. Galloway. I've always respected your interest in the ethical implications of our work. You've made a name for yourself investigating those little moral cracks where science and society collide. Thanks, I think. Theo didn't let her flatter him. He was used to this game. Flattery and disarming charm were tools of manipulation, nothing more, so, she continued, her tone shifting, you're aware, I'm sure, that the hybrids we've created are not just biological curiosities. They are, how shall I put this, pioneers. The first of their kind. A new era of human evolution. Theo folded his arms. He had been expecting this. The hybrids were the future, the next step, the dawn of a new species. Those were the words that the proponents of the experiment used to justify it. Words that always sounded too rehearsed, too convenient, like they were trying to convince themselves of something they hadn't quite processed yet. And what's the real reason for the secrecy, Dr. Novick? Theo asked, leaning in slightly. He was tired of the pretenses. He had come here today to uncover the truth, not to dance around it. Secrecy? Dr. Novick said with a small, amused chuckle. There's no secrecy here, Dr. Galloway. Only the careful management of sensitive information. This is about security, not secrecy. You see, what we've created, what we've discovered, is far beyond anything the public is ready to handle. The hybrids, they're not just smarter than us, Dr. Galloway. They have an emotional intelligence we've barely begun to comprehend. They're the future. Theo felt a chill run down his spine. Emotional intelligence? He'd read the reports. The hybrids were undeniably gifted, but they weren't just gifted. They were people. Real, living beings with the capacity to feel and think and form their own identities. That, Theo knew, was the real issue. Because if they were truly people, then they had rights that were being grossly violated. So, what you're saying is that you've created a new species. One with superior emotional processing? Theo couldn't hide the skepticism in his voice now. And you think they're ready to lead humanity? Dr. Novick's smile faltered for just a moment. It was brief, but it didn't go unnoticed. Not led, Dr. Galloway, she said carefully. But guide. They will guide humanity into the next stage of our evolution. Think of them as intermediaries, bridging the gap between us and the stars. Their role is to help us expand beyond the limitations of our own understanding. To adapt. Theo's gut twisted. He'd seen enough of these kinds of arguments. They were dressed up in promises of progress, but they were always about control. They always had been. So, what's the real agenda here, Vera? Theo pressed. Are you planning to use them to negotiate with the aliens, or to build some new type of superhuman army? Because I have a hard time believing this is all about emotional growth. The tension between them was palpable now. Dr. Novick's eyes darkened, her smile replaced by something more calculating. I think you're more aware of the situation than you're letting on, Dr. Galloway, she said, her voice low. And that's exactly why I'm talking to you. I know what you're thinking. You're worried about the ethics. You're worried about the humanity of these hybrids. But let me ask you something, Theo. How far would you go to ensure humanity's survival? How far would you go to protect the future of the human race? Theo wasn't sure how to answer her. He had his principles, he always had, but the stakes were getting higher with every passing moment. He had already started to suspect that the hybrids weren't just being experimented on. They were being weaponized, and anyone who stood in the way of that plan would be seen as a threat. I think you already know the answer to that, Theo said, his voice flat. Doctor. Novik's eyes narrowed. She looked at him for a long moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. Look, Theo. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to offer you a choice. She took a step forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You're already part of this. You've already started asking questions. And the more you ask, the more dangerous it becomes for you. For all of us. There are forces at work here, powerful forces, that will stop at nothing to control the hybrids, to control everything. And if you continue down this path, you'll find yourself at the center of it. You'll have to choose, help us lead humanity into the future, or stand in our way. Theo's mind raced. This was what he had feared, the moment where the truth came crashing down. He wasn't just investigating an ethical issue anymore. He was in the midst of a global power struggle, a war for control of the future. And the hybrids, whether they were aware of it or not, were the battlefield. I don't believe in your version of the future, Vera, Theo said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I don't think the hybrids do, either. Dr. Novik studied him for a moment longer before stepping back. Then you're making a grave mistake, Dr. Galloway, she said softly. A mistake you'll regret. Theo watched her leave, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the emptying room. The laughter of the conference seemed distant now, as though the air itself had thickened, heavy with the knowledge that whatever was happening with the hybrids was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. A few days later, Theo received a call. A simple message. Meet us at the facility. Now. It was from Ariana. He didn't hesitate. The truth was out there, somewhere. And he was going to find it, no matter what.